There's a very specific kind of loneliness that happens right before your twin flame journey truly begins. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where everyone leaves at once. I mean the strange silence that creeps into your life slowly until one day you realize nothing feels the same anymore. The conversations stop exciting you. The people who used to feel familiar suddenly feel emotionally unreachable. Even your own routines begin to feel hollow. You still smile sometimes. You still answer messages. You still go to work. Still function. But internally, something has gone quiet. And what makes this phase terrifying is that nobody around you understands it. They think you're depressed, or isolating, or overthinking. But deep inside, you feel something else. Something you can't explain logically. Like your soul is waiting for a door to open. I remember sitting in my car one night after a long shift, staring at absolutely nothing. The radio was playing softly. People were walking past me. Life was happening everywhere around me. And yet, it felt like my spirit had stepped outside of time. No urgency. No excitement. No emotional noise. Just stillness. A painful stillness. At the time, I thought my life was falling apart. Years later, I realized that silence was not punishment. It was preparation. And if your life suddenly became quiet before meeting your twin flame, before separation, before awakening, before everything cracked open emotionally, there's a reason. A very deep one. And tonight, we're going to talk about it. Not in the polished spiritual way people post online, but in the raw way it actually feels when your soul starts rearranging your entire existence behind the scenes. Because this journey, it rarely begins with fireworks. Most of the time, it begins with silence. Chapter 1: When life stops distracting you. I used to think something was wrong with me when I stopped enjoying things that once consumed my attention. The parties felt loud. The flirting felt empty. Even friendships I loved started feeling emotionally thin, like everyone was speaking on the surface while something deeper inside me was starving. And honestly, that phase scared me more than heartbreak ever did. At least heartbreak gives you a clear emotional event. This was different. This felt like emotional fog. Like my soul had quietly unplugged from the world while my body kept pretending everything was normal. Have you ever experienced that? Where nothing catastrophic happened, yet suddenly your life loses emotional color? You wake up tired. Not physically. Soul tired. You scroll for stimulation, but nothing lands. Music stops hitting the same. Conversations feel repetitive. You start craving silence without understanding why. And people notice. They ask, "Why are you so distant lately? Are you okay? You've changed." And the uncomfortable part, you know they're right. You have changed, but you don't yet know into what. That's the stage most people misunderstand. They think the twin flame journey begins when you meet the person. No, it starts earlier, far earlier. It begins when your soul can no longer tolerate distractions strong enough to keep you asleep. That quiet phase is spiritual compression. Life starts removing noise so you can finally hear yourself. And that process feels brutal at first. You lose interest in chasing validation. Your nervous system starts rejecting shallow dynamics. Even your body begins reacting differently to certain people. You feel drained after fake conversations. Crowded places exhaust you. Your intuition becomes sharper. Almost painfully sharp. You start sensing emotional dishonesty immediately. And suddenly, being alone feels safer than forcing connection. I remember losing entire friend groups during this phase. Not through conflict. Just energetic distance. No hatred. No dramatic endings. Just silence. And silence can feel unbearable when you've spent your whole life using noise to avoid yourself. That's the hidden beginning of awakening. Not enlightenment. Exposure. Your soul starts exposing every place where you abandoned yourself emotionally just to feel loved. And the strange part, your twin flame often enters your life only after this inner quiet reaches its peak. Not before. Your soul has to create space first. Space for recognition. Space for emotional intensity. Space for destiny itself. Otherwise, you would miss them completely. Or worse, you would meet them while still addicted to emotional numbness. And that changes everything. Lesson of this chapter. When life suddenly becomes quiet, it doesn't always mean you're losing your path. Sometimes it means your soul is removing distractions powerful enough to keep you disconnected from yourself. The silence arrives first so recognition can arrive later. Personal reflection. Looking back now, I realize I kept trying to fix the quiet. I filled my schedule, forced conversations, tried dating people I knew I didn't truly feel connected to. Anything to avoid sitting in that stillness. But the stillness kept returning. Almost like life was whispering, "No, stay here. Something important is coming." And eventually, it did. Chapter 2: The Emotional Collapse Before Soul Recognition. Nobody talks enough about how emotionally disoriented you become right before a major soul connection enters your life. People romanticize twin flames. They talk about synchronicities, telepathy, magnetic attraction, but they rarely talk about the collapse beforehand. The crying spells that come from nowhere. The exhaustion. The nights where you stare at the ceiling feeling emotionally detached from your own identity. I remember one particular week where I couldn't explain anything I was feeling. Nothing was technically wrong, but internally, I felt cracked open. Tiny things triggered me. Songs, smells, random memories, eye contact with strangers. Even silence started carrying emotion. And what disturbed me most was how deeply alone I felt around people who claimed to love me. That phase changes you. You stop wanting surface-level reassurance. You start craving emotional truth so intensely that fake affection almost feels physically painful. And this is where many people accidentally abandon their awakening. They rush to numb it. New relationships, constant stimulation, attention, work, scrolling, drinking, escapism, anything to avoid feeling the emotional restructuring happening underneath. But your soul keeps pushing, quietly, relentlessly, and eventually, you reach a point where your old emotional identity can no longer survive. That's when destiny starts moving. I know that sounds dramatic, but think about it honestly. How many people would even recognize a true soul connection if they were still emotionally sedated by distractions? Most wouldn't. They would confuse it with chemistry, or fear, or inconvenience. The emotional collapse before meeting your twin flame serves a purpose. It strips away emotional anesthesia. So when the connection arrives, you feel it completely. That's why so many people describe the first encounter as terrifying instead of romantic. Your nervous system recognizes them before your mind catches up. And suddenly, everything inside you wakes up at once. Desire, fear, longing, recognition, panic. You feel seen in places you spent years hiding. And strangely, the silence before meeting them prepared you for that moment. Without the quiet, you never would have heard your soul recognize theirs. Lesson of this chapter: the emotional collapse before a twin flame connection is not weakness. It's the dismantling of emotional numbness. Your soul becomes sensitive again, so it can recognize something real when it finally arrives. Personal reflection. I didn't understand why I cried so much during that season. Not dramatic crying, quiet crying, the kind where tears fall while washing dishes, or sitting in traffic, or hearing a sentence that somehow reaches an unhealed place inside you. At the time, I thought I was breaking. Now I understand. I was becoming emotionally reachable again. Chapter 3: Why Isolation Often Happens Before Activation. One of the hardest parts of this journey is the isolation. Not always physical isolation. Energetic isolation. You can sit in a room full of people and still feel emotionally elsewhere. And honestly, that feeling becomes almost unbearable right before activation. You begin noticing how disconnected most interactions actually are. People talk, but rarely reveal themselves. They flirt, but avoid intimacy. They say, "I'm here for you," yet disappear the moment emotions become inconvenient. After awakening begins, your tolerance for emotional performance drops dramatically. And this creates loneliness. Deep loneliness. Especially for people who spent years shape-shifting to survive emotionally. I know that feeling intimately. There was a season where I stopped posting online. Stopped reaching out first. Stopped forcing presence where I felt invisible. And suddenly, my phone became quiet. Painfully quiet. That silence revealed something difficult. Some connections only survive when you abandon yourself to maintain them. That realization changes a person permanently. And strangely enough, this isolation often appears right before your twin flame activation fully begins. Why? Because your soul is recalibrating your emotional standards. You can no longer tolerate fragmented intimacy. You start craving depth with frightening intensity. Eye contact that lingers. Conversations that expose truth. Presence that feels emotionally naked. Not performance. Not games. Realness. And when your soul reaches that threshold, the universe responds differently. You begin attracting experiences designed to wake you up emotionally, including the connection itself. But first, life removes the noise. And removal hurts. Sometimes the quiet isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's filtration. Not everyone can follow you into the next version of your soul. That realization hurts. But it also liberates you. You stop begging for connection. You start recognizing resonance. And there's a massive difference between those two things. Lesson of this chapter. Isolation before twin flame activation is often emotional recalibration. Your soul stops tolerating shallow connection, so it can prepare for intimacy that reaches far beyond personality and performance. Personal reflection. There were nights I genuinely wondered if I had become too much. Too emotional. Too intense. Too aware. But later, I met people who made depth feel safe instead of excessive. And that changed the way I understood loneliness forever. Chapter for the strange calm before destiny arrives. Here's the part almost nobody expects. Right before major soul activation, life can become eerily calm. Not happy. Not fulfilled. Just still. Like standing in the middle of emotional fog waiting for something unseen to emerge. And that calm can feel disturbing, especially if you're used to chaos. Many people raised in emotional inconsistency mistake peace for emptiness. I did. At first, I thought the silence meant my life was losing meaning. But eventually I realized the chaos had simply stopped distracting me from myself. That's different. There's a moment before twin flame activation where your soul enters observation mode. You start noticing patterns, repeated emotional cycles, attachment wounds, avoidance, fear of vulnerability, fear of abandonment. Everything becomes visible. And honestly, that visibility hurts. You realize how many times you accepted crumbs while calling it love. How often you silenced your intuition just to keep someone close. How many versions of yourself were built around survival instead of truth. And the stillness forces you to face all of it. No distractions left. Just you, your nervous system, your memories, and the ache underneath everything you tried not to feel. But this phase serves a sacred purpose. Your soul is clearing emotional static. So when destiny arrives, you can recognize what's different about it. Not just intellectually, energetically. You feel it in your chest. Your breathing changes. Your instincts sharpen. Something ancient inside you says, there you are. And after that moment, life never fully returns to what it was before. Lesson of this chapter. The calm before twin flame activation is not emotional death. It's preparation. Your soul becomes still enough to finally recognize what resonates beyond fear, attachment, and illusion. Chapter 5: Why Your Soul Needed the Silence. I know many of you listening still resent the quiet phase. Part of you wishes life would have stayed normal. Simple. Predictable. Emotionally manageable. I understand that feeling deeply. There are days I still miss who I was before awakening shattered everything I thought I understood about love. Before separation. Before triggers. Before soul recognition exposed every wound I buried beneath independence. But if I'm honest, the silence saved me. Without it, I would have continued settling for emotionally unavailable connections. I would have kept confusing chemistry with intimacy. I would have ignored my intuition every single time it whispered, "This isn't your soul's home." The quiet stripped me down emotionally. And painful as that was, it made me capable of real recognition. That's what many people miss about this journey. Twin flame activation isn't only about meeting another person. It's about finally meeting yourself without distractions, without masks, without emotional sedation, without performance. And that encounter, it changes everything. You stop abandoning your truth for temporary closeness. You stop chasing people who only love fragmented versions of you. You begin valuing emotional safety, energetic honesty, spiritual depth. Not perfectly, not instantly, but gradually. And somewhere inside all that silence, your soul begins remembering who it actually is. Not who trauma shaped it into. Who it truly is underneath survival. That remembrance feels both beautiful and devastating. Like grieving someone you used to be, while simultaneously becoming someone more real. And oddly enough, that's often the exact moment destiny activates. Not when you're chasing it. Not when you're desperately searching for love. But when your soul finally becomes emotionally available to truth. Lesson of this chapter. Your soul needed the quiet to reconnect with itself. The silence was not abandonment. It was emotional preparation for a connection and an awakening powerful enough to alter the direction of your entire life. The message they needed to hear. So if your life has become unusually quiet lately, if friendships faded, if distractions stopped working, if your heart feels emotionally suspended between grief and transformation, please hear me carefully. You are not necessarily lost, and you are not failing. Sometimes the soul goes silent right before everything changes, right before the person arrives, right before separation awakens you, right before healing begins, right before destiny opens. The silence is uncomfortable, but silence is where recognition is born. And one day, you'll look back at this strange, lonely season differently. You'll realize your soul wasn't punishing you. It was preparing you, preparing your nervous system, preparing your heart, preparing your awareness, preparing you to finally recognize a connection that reaches beyond ego, beyond performance, beyond ordinary attachment. And when that moment comes, you'll understand why nothing superficial could satisfy you anymore. Your soul already knew something deeper was coming, even before you did. So if this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, leave a comment below and tell me, what became quiet in your life right before your awakening began? I read those stories more than you know. And if you're walking through separation, soul confusion, emotional exhaustion, or spiritual awakening right now, subscribe. Not for perfection, not for polished spirituality, but for honest conversations about what this journey actually feels like when it breaks you open and slowly rebuilds you into someone more real.